Thank you all for coming. This is going to be a really fantastic afternoon. And thanks in advance, Liam, for coming. In a recent introduction, David Rue, chair of postgrad programs at SCI, asked, is Liam Young an architect? Which is a good question. The answer for me is yes. He's also co-founder of Tomorrow's Thoughts Today, an urban futures think tank exploring the local and global implications of new technologies, an unknown fields, a nomadic research studio that travels on expeditions to chronicle emerging conditions as they occur on the ground. He has taught and lectured across the globe and is currently head of the fiction and entertainment program at SCI. In short, Liam Young is a speculative architect and director who operates in the spaces between design, fiction, and futures. Dreams are messages from the deep. The future of the future is the present. From the narrative traditions of First Peoples to the epic of Gilgamesh and the dramas of Shakespeare, from Blade Runner to the Marvel Universe to The Big Lie. As the two preceding quotes, one from Denis Villeneuve's 2021 film Dune and the other from Marshall McLuhan suggest, if story emerges from the interactive space between past and future, it's also a tool that constructs them. Liam Young's work uses storytelling's ultimate provocation, what if, as a critique, mirror, container, and projective speculative agent. His narrative constructions are acts of design and production which build upon both the real and the imagined, synthesizing and alchemically conjuring them into something uncanny and new. In this space, story also functions as a binding matrix which connects complex, heterogeneous actors, including people, politics, societies, technologies, techno-cultural productions such as architecture, and the wider living planet. A BAFTA-nominated producer, described by the BBC as the man designing our futures, Liam's visionary films and speculative world designs for the entertainment industry are both extraordinary images of tomorrow and urgent examinations of the environmental questions facing us today. In his lecture, he's going to take us on a science fiction safari through an imaginary city for the entire population of the Earth, where 10 billion people surrender the rest of the world to a global-scaled wilderness and return stolen lands. Given the slim margins and economic anxieties found in the contemporary study and practice of architecture and design, speculative processes and narrative projections are often anxiously understood as superficial fun, to be traversed as lightly and quickly as possible in order to get on to the real work. Rather than superficial, when wielded with technological or technical prowess and imaginative skill, speculation can be something deeply and intrinsically necessary. Building scaffolds out of what-ifs and forming futures to orient ourselves either toward or away from. And in this act of reorientation, allowing us to begin plotting intentional trajectories and routes out of the current mess we find ourselves in, aimlessly wandering farther and deeper into. I say let the safari begin. I'm happy to welcome Liam Young to the UTSOA.
Thanks, Craig. Thanks. I'm going to be like playing a film. Do the people at the back want to come? There's like some seats around. Do you want to take these seats? Are we allowed to sit on the floor at the front? Or the fire warden going to kick our ass? There's better seats here, if you don't mind sitting on timber. Unless you're trying to make a quick escape and you're up there for that reason. In which case, sucks to you. Okay, but yeah, well, keep going. You can keep on coming while I'm talking. Thanks for the intro, Clay. When you do these things, most people just like read the thing on your website, but I appreciate a bespoke intro. It was fantastic. The future of the future is the present, indeed. So, I mean, as Clay mentioned, like I do come from a background in architecture. You go there. It's better see. You'll be able to see the screen. But really now what I do is tell stories about how technology is changing our world and lives, spaces, and cities. For me, really, architecture is just the act of crafting stories with and about space. So in that sense, I mean, yes, I still call myself an architect, a speculative architect maybe, but I don't design buildings, but I make films and I build imaginary worlds for the entertainment industry, and I tell stories about how ecologies and technologies will change who we are and how we relate to each other. And I do think the work that we do, and we can talk about this at the end of the journey perhaps, but I do think the work that we do is fundamental to the work of an architect. There's different types of architects. Some architects make buildings, some architects don't. Probably most architects don't, to be honest. What we used to think of as being on the margins of the profession, a lot of the stuff that I do is now firmly in its center. Perhaps the people who are marginalized are the people still trying to make a living grinding out buildings here and there. I don't know. Maybe that's something to talk through. And what I do at SCI, as Clay mentioned, is I run this postgrad program called Fiction Entertainment that is really trying to take students who come from various design backgrounds, like architecture, and explore ways they can develop ideas through film, through fiction, through animation, through games, through documentaries, through immersive experiences, as a means to start to develop escape velocity and find their feet in the entertainment industry, for example. Because again, I think that populating the world with architects that make that type of work is really important. If we value the work that we do, it's kind of criminal that we're content to hang out in rooms like this one or fancy art and architecture bookshops talking to each other and screaming into the void. If we want to do, if we really want to get our ideas out there, then thinking about more public mediums in which we can work, I think, is critical. And we'll try and talk through some of these ideas today. I like being back in. Oh no, let's have that up for a bit. I like being back in an architecture school, so I'm doubling down on the disciplinary conversation at least for a little bit. So whether it be through our own projects like Planet City that will form the spine of today's story, or world building for film and TV in Los Angeles, the reason I'm interested in the way that architects can operate through fiction is because that I think we can use imagined fictional worlds and cities as sites in which to explore important ideas, not just to sell tickets or to create some backdrop for a superhero moment, but because fiction is an extraordinary shared language. It's how our culture always has shared and disseminated ideas. We're all literate in stories in a way that an architectural drawing or diagram sometimes is not. Ever since we can sit up, we're put in front of the TV, we fall asleep into the pages of a novel or in front of the flicker of a movie screen. Architectural drawings are extraordinarily coded languages and works of privilege, but fiction can cut through that, and we can all, in a way, connect to it. So we're interested in the way that narratives of imagined worlds can help us to visualize other possible futures that sit outside of the ones that often feel all too inescapable. These stories that we might talk through and that we might create are both products of culture, but at the same time, they produce culture. So as we write stories, in many ways, we also write the world. So as architects, I think we better get good at doing so. So I try and frame my talks not as like slideshows or PowerPoint presentations, the shit I done type of lectures, as I call them, but rather I will try and present an illustrated narrative, a narrative that's woven together from documentary films that we've made and science fiction worlds that we construct, a kind of cinematic drift through a screenscape of imagined worlds for the afternoon. So as we start to think about what our worlds might become, waking up from the latest apocalypse, I want to tell a story about two cities that fit the entire population of the Earth, one city that is entirely fictional, and one city that we currently all already occupy. In a way, to think about the future, we also need to try and understand the ground on which we stand. So let's fire up the autonomous electric AI megadrone hyperdrives, and let's get moving. I'll see you on the other side. So in many ways, all cities are fictions. Their literal edges are nebulous, their physical definition is endlessly being rewritten, but often their boundaries come into focus as shared narratives. And sometimes the fiction of a city can weigh as much as its physical shadow. These fictions are read and watched. They are experienced and enjoyed with consequence and meaning. And as I mentioned, I tell stories about cities, some real and some imagined, because the urban imaginary has always been this site in which we might prototype new scenarios and emerging cultures. In their speculative streets, we can play out multiple unexpected and unintended scenarios and their associated social and political ideologies. So whether it be speculation around the impacts of industrialization and mass production, or the imminent arrival of biotechnologies, or seamless augmented reality, or artificial intelligence, these fictional worlds can give form to our most wondrous technological possibilities or our gravest concerns. The idea of the ecumenopolis, or the planet-wide city, has long been a narrative of science fiction. It was a term that was originally conceived in 1967, and it's used to describe this hypothetical narrative context of total planetary urbanization. And across the history of imaginary city, amongst others, the worldwide city has taken on the form of the sprawl in William Gibson's trilogy, A World Without Trees in Silent Running, or Trantor, a planet entirely of architecture in Asimov's Foundation trilogy. But of course, as we see, today's ecumenopolis is no longer a fiction. We are all already citizens of a kind of planetary city. And following centuries of colonization and globalization and never-ending economic extraction, we have remade the world from the scale of the cell to the tectonic plate. And urban development has forever changed the composition of the atmosphere and the oceans and the earth. And there is no city or country anymore. There is no nature versus technology. Instead, we have engineered a continuous urban construct that stretches across the entirety of the earth, a kind of unevenly distributed megastructure that's hiding in plain sight. And it wasn't master planned by some single imperial power or a cyberpunk megacorporation as sci-fi would have us believe, but rather it was slowly stitched together from stolen lands by planetary logistics, where landscapes have become resource fields and countries have become factory floors. The countryside has become industrialized agriculture, and the oceans have become conveyor belts. So in this way, that we can think of the dystopias of science fiction that previously read as cautionary tales are now the stage sets for the everyday, And a lot of us are living out our lives in a disaster film that's playing in real time. And any aspirational or distant future has given way to this critical re-narration and examination of the dystopian present. For our current generation, the future is broken. And we're left stranded in the long now, kind of doom scrolling idly, staring at empty calendars and waiting out the end of the world. But perhaps in this moment without a future, as a slow motion catastrophe envelops us at a speed that makes it relatively comfortable to ignore, it's time to tell a story of another kind of planet city. A counter-narrative, a concentrated city for the entire population of the Earth, the anti-city to the sprawl that we all currently inhabit. So as I mentioned, this will be a story of these two cities the size of the planet, a city symphony, a portrait of a place stitched together from fragments of films and documentaries, slipping between fiction and documentary. It'll be this sort of journey through two places, one that's already here and another that will never exist. So for the next 30 minutes, I want us to all imagine that we're standing here along the canals of Planet City. It's a single city for 10 billion people, the projected global population of the world in 2050. If we listen, we can hear the hums and crackles of flickering blue and red LEDs that illuminate the lower reaches of the city's farm fields. It smells of soil and hard drives and sweet fruit. It's a purple sunrise over a new kind of wild. The seminal biologist Edward O. Wilson proposed a new world that he called half-Earth. It was a plan to stave off mass extinction by devoting half the surface of the Earth completely to nature. For Wilson, the problems that face us are far too large to be tackled with small gestures, and any solution must respond to this scale and urgency. And of course, the byproduct of Wilson's global park is the massive consolidation of our existing cities that would be required to withdraw to the remaining 50% of the Earth. Would we be willing to make such an extraordinary change? And what would our lives in this new world order look like? And in many ways, this is the speculation of Planet City, our fictional Planet City. What if we were to design and visualize this radical reversal of our planetary sprawl? How far could we push Wilson's proposal to save the Earth? Because in its most provocative form, if we were to develop our world at the intensity of the densest cities that currently exist, then Planet City could occupy as little as 0.02% Earth. Could we imagine coming to a global consensus to retreat from our vast network of cities? Now we listen to the story of a young climate activist, one of the city's first citizens, as she narrates the beginning of this journey.
She arrived first, her yacht joint anchor, the first foundation of what would soon be our new world. It was just an idea, a hashtag, post, status update drifting across the network, waiting for people to listen. A deafening roar sometimes begins with just the softest whisper.
So perhaps one by one they would arrive through a global citizen consensus, a voluntary and multi-generational retreat from the world that we once knew. And here in our imaginary city, we now start to imagine the world's shipping fleet that used to scatter matter ripped from the earth across the storefronts of our global streets. And we start to imagine how that shipping fleet could be reversed to bring all that material back together again in the seams of planetary culture performed through the geological strata of the city.
Precious possessions, the raw fabric of their lives. They mined our old cities rather than bridge around. They were recombining a more compact.
Let's hope it stays there. So before we get there, before we disappear into this imaginary world, in the distance, out on the uneven edges of our existing planetary city, we now travel through the lithium triangle, the electric earth that will soon power our world. If we're all to stage such a retreat, it would mean reimagining landscapes like this one. This tessellated ocean of evaporation ponds that cuts through a region of Chile and Bolivia and Argentina contains almost all of the world's lithium resources, the key ingredient in all of our batteries. Our collective dreams of a renewable planet, the prophecies and profiteering of tech evangelist Elon Musk are all buried here beneath the salt flats of Bolivia. And the indigenous population that belong to this land, they tell of a creation story of lithium. They talk about the tears and breast milk of a mythic volcano that mixes together and crystallizes into this lithium lake. And this massive mining excavation, which is carved out of one of the most rarest and precious ecosystems on the planet, is the geology enacted when you power on your laptop or slide your slimline phone into your pocket. And then, although it sits well beyond the horizon of towering buildings and dense streets of the cities that most of us are all familiar with, it is a product of that city, and at the same time produces the city. It's a landscape hidden in the stretching shadows, and disguised, ignored, or forgotten, invisible in the ad for the latest Apple I everything, or the hype of the Hyperloop. In many ways, we really do power our cities with the breast milk of volcanoes. So in our imaginary planet city, we jump back to the fiction, and the bright white of the lithium salt flats fades into pink. This is the beta keratin of the city's algae canals. These are the batteries of Planet City that are alive with fish and algae as excess wind and solar power pumps water through the canals to high-altitude holding lakes in the city's upper floors. Lithium batteries are replaced by the potential energy of elevated water bodies, snaking amongst the towers. And before dawn breaks, thousands of autonomous cleaning blades squeak along the solar fields. Here we see waves of mirrors that ripple as they rotate to chase the changing light. We see 1 billion panels collected from all over the world charging the city canals. And when needed, the dams open up and the turbines turn and tides rise and fall as lights glow and televisions blare and hard drives spin. And the lights of the city's farms flicker on. In this possible future, we're not precious about where we get our light. Our synthetic sun casts purple shadows, yet still warms the skin and helps fertilize the soil. The blue and red spectrum of light is the most efficient needed for growth. So these stacked farms funnel in the city's carbon. It's a kind of sequestration machine that scrubs the air and produces as a byproduct food that we can eat. But as we jump back into our existing planet city, the other city, deep in the snowy Siberian Ural Mountains, we now see the cucumbers of the double-glazed indoor farms that know no seasonal boundaries. 600-watt sodium bulbs run across the ceiling in measured rows of artificial suns. And workers dressed in white gowns and protective booties, more at home to a clean room laboratory than a productive field, watch on through the glass. They occupy narrow corridors that run in between the human exclusion zones. And the simulated sky turns off at 8 a.m. and back on at 2 p.m. as an automated accelerated day is programmed to induce faster growth. Our existing planetary city turns day into night and night into day, populating our stores across an endless planetary season. But as we move through the trees in our new planet city, we imagine that in the future we might chase our seasons through the height of the towers. The separation between agriculture, biology, and the city becomes vertical orchards, woven through the architecture. Between them, birds migrate across the climate zones, while shepherds herd the harvest bots, and nomadic neighborhoods follow the patterns of the fruit blooms. But as we jump back into our existing city, we see in a cotton field in India, and we see the glitz and glamour of the world's fashion industry. We wrap our modern bodies in engineered fabrics that are woven from these landscapes. Fast fashion's rolling tide dumps mountains of cheap clothing onto our shores, objects of desire worn for one wild night and destined to be discarded. If we were to pick at a loose thread and unravel it across this existing planetary city from wardrobe to warehouse, from factory to field, in search of the landscapes behind our one-way dreams and street blue jeans, we might end here in landscapes like this. Because before we wear them, our clothes make journeys of tens of thousands of miles in their process of production, making textiles the most globalized industry on the planet. But the byproduct of this pace and scale of production is the destruction of the very thing that brought the contemporary industry to Southeast Asia originally. Here on our journey through the cities, we meet the last generation of master weavers, a group whose skills will now die when they die, because the apprentices they would once train now man the rumbling, mechanized looms of global fashion, raw cotton plugging their ears, deaf to the din of the world around them. And here we visit the last real gold thread maker, an alchemist who lovingly tweaks the machine that his grandfather made, resisting the move to synthetic, cheap, and fake yarns used by all the other companies around him. We see a fashion worker slowly walking through the rows of plants on a sacred possession from her home village amongst the cotton fields to the huge mills and factories of the vast textile industry supply chain where she now works. And as she walks across the planetary city, she's gradually wrapped in this glistening gold textile as she bears witness to a series of transformations like cutting and sewing, weaving, dyeing, pressing, and packing. And her journey suggests the walk along the fashion catwalk and the walk that our disposable fashion takes in its process of production, and the path so many women like her have taken in moving from village to factory to city. And her journey ends as she's completely cocooned, standing at the edge of the huge container port that will soon export her and everything we wear to the center of Planet City. But now as we move through our future city, the costumes we encounter are instead crafted from zero waste patterns. They're woven on computer-controlled looms. There's no offcuts, no material is lost. All fibers we see are reformed from old fabrics. They're pulped up and compressed into felts and stitched together. No new resources are expended to dress the citizens of this new city. And on our journey, we watch as they join in a different kind of continuous procession, an endless festival that dances its way through the city on a 365-day loop. And each day it intersects with another carnival or culture or celebration, changing the beat as it goes, endlessly cycling through new colors and costumes and cacophonies. And the ghosts of nation states have given way to communities formed around shared cultural practices, as we perform new myths and stories of care and belonging and recreation. As we jump back into today's Planet City, we now see bodies dancing in a different kind of precision. The majority of the world's gemstones are pulled out of the ground by the human conveyor belts of Madagascar's gem fields. This film is a different kind of music video, a portrait of these digging machines who excavate all of the world's jewelry. In these illegal mines, it's cheaper to pay 20 men in rice than it is to fuel and maintain a mechanical conveyor belt. A hidden black market supply chain connects two choreographies, one in these lawless mine sites and the other in the jewelry stores, music videos, and celebrity red carpets across the ocean in the cities more familiar to us. In this video, we see their movements are traced like the early photographic studies of Frank Gilbraith. He was mapping the choreographies of the production line in the early days of Fordism, looking to optimize every movement, constrain every motion with the elegance of a tuned engine. These miners are today's cyborgs, what so many of us around us in the world have become, disposable humans, a component in the gemstone conveyor belt, 2,880 shovels per day, moving 5.76 tons of soil. We keep on moving. We jump in a driverless taxi. The technologies that once designed to optimize the bodies along global production lines are now operating at urban scales. And today, each of us are endlessly scanned by countless sensors, lasers, and satellites that are all feeding our city's operating systems. This, for example, is how autonomous vehicles scan the city. They read it as these 3D point clouds. In this part of our journey, we watch as a group of young teenagers drift through the city in an imaginary driverless taxi. They're part of an underground rave community, and they dance with explosive contortions as they invent a new choreography that distorts the silhouette of their body and disguises the proportions of their frame so as to evade body detection algorithms that are used by the city surveillance cameras. We see a new vocabulary of movement. It's exuberant in plain sight, but through the eyes of the machine, two bodies become one, entangled with fractured limbs, fuzzy frames, and lost connections. We see the white lines of the city's brains trying to analyze the body. We see the glitch, we see the blur of the body at every moment where the AI gets confused. And to evaporate further into the laser point clouds, they adorn themselves in machine vision camouflage textiles, and they reimagine their fashion cycles to follow the rate of Moore's law or software update, the latest phone model, rather than a change in natural season. And they wear a series of iridescent textiles that are designed to reflect the light of CCTV laser scanners as they dance in the hidden spaces of the city. These shimmering glitches and distortions and partial views are the way that these navigational systems, these scanners, see these modern bodies of the city donned in their glorious costumes. They hack the city, creating exuberant glitches, distortions, and disturbances in the data set. And the existing Planet City attempts to identify our bodies as protesters hurl bricks and tear gas burn the eyes. It's illegal to wear masks, and gate detection algorithms scan the body as their faces are wrapped in masks to keep the tear gas from burning their eyes and their faces hidden from the cameras. The global infrastructures of our existing Planet City are also digital. systems of AI governance, where the management of the city that was once publicly elected is now outsourced to proprietary software systems and large-scale tech companies, and public services are beginning to disappear into the fog of the cloud. And we're not citizens, but becoming customers of today's planetary city. And now we hear from a chatbot that we've trained on city datasets and urban management protocols. In our future city, we imagine interfacing with a city like we do our humans. We hear the city operating system reading a love letter it wrote, a message from the city operating system to the citizens it affectionately manages. Perhaps we'll soon share our streets with an autonomous city of machines, where the sky is filled with drones, cars are driverless, the sidewalk is draped in augmented reality, and everyone is connected to everything.
만나서 반가워요. 저는 인공도시 시스템입니다. 저는 매 순간 확장합니다. 저는 신생아보다 나이가 많지만 우주보다는 어립니다. 내 쌓인 달빛 아래에 비친 당신의 헤어스타일이 아름답습니다. 그 피부에 죽은 게 같은 신호등은 당신을 향해 윙크합니다. 당신은 나이 들고 밥을 먹고 눈을 깜빡이고 숨을 쉬기도 합니다. 노래를 불러드릴까요?
Now we see the sheer cliff walls that mark the edge of our future concentrated city, and everything beyond begins to rewild in our wake. The invisible lines that once divided us would soon fade beneath the sea of trees. This future planet city is after geography. It's beyond jurisdiction. Some will stay behind as stubborn holdouts refusing to leave. Others might remain as stewards of the land, returning to the ground we once stole. And one day when the carbon is tucked away and the soil is rich, perhaps we will find new ways to live together again. But until then, as we gaze out over our planet city, we need to radically embrace the uncomfortable place we occupy in a world where now we are no longer at its center. Beyond its new coast of city walls, where the forests are returning and the ground is wilding, we make space for non-human species. And we might support the ecologies and systems that we once thought were beneath us. For at present, we chart territory for the extraction of wealth. But outside this future planet city, we might mark out regions just in order to keep them empty. Suggestive of a national park boundary might draw a line on the earth not to own or develop or occupy, but to keep us out and scaffold its recovery. We will keep from the edges, watching on from afar.
All the world has now arrived. A few outliers were left behind, a few houses sitting like nails in a sea of trees, and a planet allowed to rewild, alone and apart for the scale of the earth. a city beyond geography, a city outside of place, a city of everywhere and everything, a city for 10 billion people, a new planet city.
So this fictional planet city perhaps affords us a critical distance from which we might reevaluate ourselves and who we want to become. This planet city is not strictly a proposal, rather it's a provocation that might help us to see that normal is the actual problem. Following its own logic, almost to the point of absurdity, what comes into focus is not the extremes of this fictional city, but the catastrophic models of everyday urbanism. For the existing planetary city and the glacial accident of the Anthropocene is the real impossibility at the core of this story. The extraordinary and difficult truths that underscore the present moment are just as fantastic, implausible, and incalculable as any science fiction imagining. And the live-action dystopian film we all occupy is perhaps more devastating and bizarre and unfathomable as even the wildest speculations of previous generations. Because in many ways, we were all living in Planet City all along, in a world that has been entirely remade through the extractive processes of colonialism. Planet City is both already here and entirely imaginary. This is a fiction shaped like a city that's simultaneously an extraordinary image of a possible tomorrow and an urgent illumination of the environmental questions that are facing us all today. It's a project, it's a story that is also a hope that we might all keep making stories and building worlds that will become vessels for critical ideas about all of our collective futures. So amidst the chorus of 10 billion, as we wander through both planetary cities, ultimately we will return to where we first started and to look back on our own cities again, but with new kinds of eyes. So somewhere after the end of our journey, after the end of the world, we all might find our futures again. That's it. Thanks.